Hello everyone, my name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar. That means that I live and breathe the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I'm here to answer your questions. I didn't get to do a video last week, I apologize for that, so I'm sort of looking back at the past 2 weeks worth of questions, and I had to be, since I didn't want this video to be doubly long, I had to be just very, very discerning. I didn't get to include every single question that I liked, but I whittled it down to 17 questions. So we're going to try and get through it in a timely fashion, and I'm going to do a reading as I normally do at the beginning here, a little bit of the Fellowship of the Ring, I believe we should do. I haven't decided what to read. Let me just pick a random page here. Well, I don't want to read the whole Balrog part again, but you know what might be maybe a bit of the... Oh, this is perfect. This is perfect. Maybe a little bit of the poetry found here in the Lothlorien chapter about Nimrodel. So Nimrodel's really interesting because I'm actually writing a story that's somewhat related to her, and sort of the backstory there of Dol Amroth. So it's just amazing that I was like, oh, I found a poem on it. Oh, that's the Nimrodel poem. I'm going to read this section up to and including the poem here from the Lothlorien chapter of the Fellowship of the Ring. When all the company had crossed, they sat and rested and ate a little food, and Legolas told them tales of Lothlorien, that the elves of Mirkwood still kept in their hearts, of sunlight and starlight upon the meadows by the great river before the world was grey. At length a silence fell, and they heard the music of the waterfall running sweetly in the shadows. Almost Frodo fancied that he could hear a voice singing, mingled with the sound of the water. "Do you hear the voice of Nimrodel?" asked Legolas. "I will sing you a song of the maiden Nimrodel, who bore the same name as the stream beside which she lived long ago. It is a fair song in our woodland tongue, but this is how it runs in the Westron speech, as some in Rivendell now sing it." In a soft voice hardly to be heard amid the rustle of the leaves above them he began. "An elven maiden there was of old, a shining star by day. Her mantle white was hemmed with gold, her shoes of silver grey. A star was bound upon her brows, a light was on her hair, as sun upon the golden boughs in Lorien the fair. Her hair was long, her limbs were white, and fair she was and free, and in the wind she went as light as leaf of linden tree. Beside the falls of Nimrodel, by water clear and cool, her voice was falling, silver fell, into the shining pool. Where now she wanders none can tell, in sunlight or in shade, for lost of yore was Nimrodel, and in the mountains strayed. The elven ship in haven grey, beneath the mountain lee, awaited her for many a day beside the roaring sea. A wind by night in northern lands arose and loud it cried, and drove the ship from elven strands across the streaming tide. When dawn came dim, the land was lost, the mountains sinking grey, beyond the heaving waves that tossed their plumes of blinding spray. Amroth beheld the fading shore, now low beyond the swell, and cursed the faithless ship that bore him far from Nimrodel. Of old he was an elven king, a lord of tree and glen, when golden were the boughs in spring in fair Lothlorien. From a helm to sea they saw him leap, an arrow from the string, and dive into the water deep, as mew upon the wing. The wind was in his flowing hair, the foam about him shone, afar they saw him strong and fair, go riding like a swan. But from the west has come no word, and on the hither shore no tidings elven folk have heard of Amroth evermore. The voice of Legolas faltered, and the song ceased. "I cannot sing any more," he said. "That is but a part, for I have forgotten much. It is long and sad, for it tells how sorrow came upon Lothlorien, Lorien of the Blossom, when the dwarves awakened evil in the mountains." And then it gets into Legolas and Gimli bickering, because it's before they, even though it's from the chapter called Lothlorien, it's before they arrived in Lothlorien, and Lothlorien is when Legolas and Gimli go from being sort of combative to each other to becoming friends, which is excellent to see. But this is right before that, so immediately they start bickering because, of course, Legolas is blaming the dwarves for awakening the evil, and Gimli's like, "Hey, that's not exactly accurate," and they start arguing, and then, like, I think Aragorn has to be like, "Guys, enough of this," It's a good thing that they became such close friends, because there was a lot of bickering between them before that, and usually it was Gandalf who would sort of pull them apart in that sense, but and then it had to be Aragorn because Gandalf was gone at that point. Okay, so let's get into your questions that have been here for the past 2 weeks or so. Okay, here's a question that came in from Sean MCM. I thought it was cut off, but that's the entire thing, MCM. Since Balrogs were Maiar, could they adopt other appearances? To a certain extent, but not so much as Sauron or the Ainur that are in Aemon or in the Timeless Halls. Balrogs are Maiar. They appear to be incarnated, though, which makes them somewhat closer to Gandalf or Saruman than they are to Sauron. They're just not in frail old man bodies like the wizards are. The reason that I say that they're incarnated is due to the fact that Balrogs are harmed by regular weapons like Glorfindel's dagger or Gandalf's sword. Not that those are fantastic weapons, but they could be harmed by steel. They cannot seem to cast off their fauna, and the destruction of a Balrog's body leads to their death, from which they do not return. Now, Tolkien wrote, after having many different ideas about Balrogs, that there were never more than 7 of them out there. But out of the 7, the slain ones don't ever seem to return, at least that we don't hear of. They don't return in a same form or a differing form or a similar form like Sauron can. The Balrogs do have at least some degree of control over their form. When Gandalf faced Durin's Bane, it was, of course, a creature of fire and of shadow. But after Gandalf was boasted that his mastery of fire was superior, when he mentioned the flame of Anor, because Anor means the sun, the Balrog dimmed its flame and expanded the shadow, which came to be as big as the surrounding cavern. It's almost like the Balrog is saying, "Oh, your fire is better? Well, my shadow is better." Now, later still, when they plunged into the water down below the bridge, Gandalf made a comment when he was telling the story that the Balrog became a thing of slime, which could be interpreted in several different ways. How literal do you want to take that? The way that I read it is that the Balrog became slimy to adapt to being in the water. I don't think it literally became slime, but that its skin became slimy. It became a little bit more amphibious. Now, the issue is somewhat that the actual shape of a Balrog is actually kind of hard to discern. They are vaguely man-shaped, but they're so clothed in shadow and in flame that it's hard to figure out exactly where the aura of flame or shadow ends and they begin. But they do have some control, a limited control over how they appear to others, just not on the same level as like a shapeshifter like Sauron. Okay, this is a next question here. Did Tolkien ever meet Peter Jackson or any other actor who played his characters on film? If he did meet them, what were those meetings like? So Tolkien died in 1973, so the movies came out quite a bit after that. Other than the fact that one of his great grandsons had a cameo in the movies, handing out weapons in Gondor. The only person that was involved with the production of the Lord of the Rings films that we can confirm met Tolkien was Christopher Lee. So Christopher Lee was just this amazing guy, to the point where I do wonder why the internet decided to make up a bunch of, false feats and ridiculous stories about Chuck Norris when Christopher Lee was really that guy. He was really that interesting. So anyway, Christopher Lee met Tolkien in the 50s. And I refer to Christopher Lee here, he was drinking beer in an English pub with a bunch of his friends, and Tolkien walked in, and he knew another person that was in the same group that Christopher Lee was in, so he came over and he sat down with them. And the way that Christopher Lee described it, that he sort of stammered out of greeting, like, hello, Professor, he was very awestruck because he was a big fan of Tolkien's work. So Christopher Lee actually saw himself as Gandalf, and he wanted to play Gandalf his whole life, but by the time the movies were made, he was very old, and the role of Gandalf was a bit too physical for him. So he went for Saruman because it was less of a physical role. And I think he was great as Saruman. I think he's pretty fantastic there. But, yeah. So, yeah. Let's move on to the next question. Okay. What is the weakest ring in The Lord of the Rings? So, aside from, the One Ring and the Rings of Power, there were lesser rings, and we don't know how many there were or what they really do. It was just sort of mentioned by Gandalf that there were lesser rings. He said that they were essays in the craft, which basically means they were made by the elves, just like the Rings of Power, but they were practice attempts. They were really nothing more than trinkets with very small bits of magic in them. We don't know much else. They existed, and they were not strong. None of the lesser rings comes into the story of the Lord of the Rings. But out of all the rings that do, not counting, non-magical rings like Aragorn's Ring of Power here, the weakest would probably be the one that Saruman made, which was a sad attempt at making a Ring of Power of his own. Saruman was really good at uncovering secrets, and he uncovered that Gandalf had a Ring of Power, which was given to him by the elf Círdan. And this made Saruman pretty upset. He was very jealous of the fact that his inferior, so to speak, because he was the boss, he was the head wizard, had a Ring of Power given to him by the elves, and he had no such ring. His own attempt at making a ring, it didn't really seem to confer any sort of power to him. He did call himself Saruman, the ring maker at this point, and he also called himself Saruman of many colors, because his robes appeared to be white at first glance, but when he moved, they shimmered with all the different colors of the rainbow. We don't know if that has anything to do with rings, the ring that he wore, or whether he was just doing that just because he thought it was cool. But there is a possibility. I've always certainly thought that that's what the ring did. It just made his white robes appear in many different colors. So, yeah, it's not that interesting, not that useful, but it was his first attempt and his only attempt at making a ring. Okay, next question. Did some of the Valar help Frodo and Sam on their dangerous journey through the Dead Marshes, Cirith and Mordor? There is one part in Mordor that, to me at least, can only be the direct intervention of the Valar or perhaps Eru Ilúvatar, but it's when they're coming up to Mount Doom, before they start climbing it, before they reach Sammath Naur, before they were confronted by Gollum, before they even really started climbing, Frodo and Sam were just basically done. They were at the end of their endurance, their physical endurance, their mental endurance, their spiritual endurance. They could barely move. The chapter, which is called Mount Doom, maybe I'll do a reading from that next week, is exhausting and it's heartbreaking because these hobbits are coming to realize that they are physically incapable of finishing their task, but they still are compelled to try. They consistently state that they can go no further, and at one point it seems true, and then somehow they did. So I'm going to read just a little bit of that. Maybe I'll do a greater reading of this part next week, but here it is. Sam draws a deep breath. There was a path, but how he was to get up the slope to it he did not know. First he must ease his aching back. He lay flat beside Frodo for a while. Neither spoke. Slowly the light grew. Suddenly, a sense of urgency, which he did not understand, came to Sam. It was almost as if he had been called, now, or it will be too late. He braced himself and got up. Frodo also seemed to have felt the call. He struggled to his knees. "I'll crawl, Sam," he gasped. This sense of urgency gets them moving one final time towards their goal, and they both felt it, a sudden and inexplicable sense of urgency that came to Sam, and he realizes very quickly that Frodo got the same jolt of energy, but he was so tired he couldn't move at this point. Sam had been carrying him, but he said, "No, I will crawl." Considering the timing and how everything was sort of happening at the same time, the field, as seen in the next chapter, the field of Cormallen, it was now or never. The one was, if it was to be destroyed, it had to be right then at a very specific time. And the hobbits received this call to start moving. Now, not to mention that Gollum was lurking around, and if they had passed out or rested too long, he might have taken them unawares and taken the ring. And the quest would have been a complete failure at that point, right at the goal line. This sort of call, it had to have come from somewhere. Some people would say it was Gandalf, but Gandalf was very, very preoccupied at this point. I think it was the Valar, or possibly a Iluvatar, but I would say it's probably one or the other, probably the Valar. Okay, next question. This was requested by Cordeline, who asks, I recently rewatched the Lord of the Rings trilogy. In the third movie, Shelob stung Frodo, but Frodo had mithril. Why did the spider sting affect him? So the mithril doesn't cover his entire body. Mithril is fantastic armor, but it does not prevent injury totally. We have to get into that first. It's not a magic force field. One such example was earlier in the story when Frodo took a spear to the shoulder. It didn't pierce his armor. He was fine, but the blunt force of the blow still hurt, and it left an impressive bruise. Frodo described it as being caught between hammer and anvil. That's from the book. The scene still happens in the movie, though. It's just, I don't think he makes that comparison in the film. Bilbo mentioned in The Hobbit that his armor did not prevent his head from being specifically targeted for a lopping. That's why he wore the ring during the Battle of Five Armies. That being said, it was mentioned in the book that Frodo was specifically stung in the neck, the back of the neck. Sam did not witness this directly, but Frodo mentioned that that's where the pain was coming from when he was rescued by Sam later. It was his neck. Okay, next question. This one's a bit of a doozy. This came in from Erkin Yilin, I hope I'm saying it right, who asked, does Túrin killing Morgoth in one-on-one combat in Dagor-Dagorath, if Túrin killed Morgoth with help or a joint effort, why didn't Tolkien have Túrin crushingly defeat Morgoth one-on-one? So I get the feeling that this person may have been working from a limited mastery of the English language, which is perfectly fine, but I was able to sort of understand what they're getting at, which is basically like, if Túrin was going to defeat Morgoth in the final battle in Dagor-Dagorath, why wouldn't he be able to defeat him earlier in the Silmarillion? So let's talk about this prophecy. The prophecy does say that Túrin would kill Melkor, but it didn't make it into the Silmarillion. That's not actually in the Silmarillion. And like all prophecies, it's up for interpretation. Prophecies about the end of Arda existed quite a ways back in Tolkien's drafts. In the Book of Lost Tales, it is posited at one point that Melko, which is what he was called at this point, would return and start a war between the sun and the moon, and this would lead to the mutual destruction of two of the Valar, which were named Elinsor and Urwendel. Later on, in later drafts, those two they weren't Valar anymore, they were Maiar, and they were called Tilion and Arien. A final battle is mentioned in Erumani, which became Aemon later, and the kindling of the two trees. The silver tree at this point was called Silipon, which was later changed to Telperion. These versions have a common theme, a return of the light and the elves vanishing from the world. No specific heroes were mentioned. In The Shaping of Middle-earth, we get an early Silmarillion sketch of the final battle, and this one's a bit more familiar. It mentioned that Morgoth would return through the Doors of Night, and the final conflict will happen in Valinor with Fionwe, who was later renamed to Eonwe, and the spirit of Túrin would battle Morgoth, and Túrin would give the killing blow with his black sword. It is also mentioned that Earendel, who was later renamed to Eärendil, would also join the battle, though it doesn't mention him specifically fighting Morgoth. This version has the Silmarils being gathered and broken by a character named Maedhros, who later was renamed to Mathros. The return of the light, The Valar would de-age. They were called gods in this version, and then the dead gods would return to life. This prophecy is not specifically attributed to anyone in the story. In the next version of the Silmarillion, the Quenta, it was a bit more detailed version of the same idea. This is in the Shaping of Middle-earth and also mentioned in the Lost Road and other writings. It's pretty much the same, just with more details. It includes the idea of the destruction of the sun and the moon. Tulkas was added to the final battle as the primary protagonist, though he still had Túrin and Eonwe at his side. Feanor replaces Mathros, and instead of breaking the Silmarils, he gives them to Yavanna, and she breaks them. And Túrin becomes Valarindi, which means that he's considered a child of the Valar. This prophecy is specifically attributed to Namo, also known as Mandos, and is called the second prophecy of Mandos, with the first being the Doom of Mandos, seen earlier in the story. The next revision was a little the same thing, really, but it added a few details. It mentioned that Túrin returns from the afterlife specifically. It mentions... it changes one thing: Feanor breaks the jewels himself, instead of having Yavanna do it. And there's some other really minor things. Tulkas is still considered the primary protagonist at this point, but the earlier mention from an earlier version that it would be Túrin who would do the killing blow on Morgoth was restored. So no version of the Dig or Diggeroth prophecy made its way into the Silmarillion, the published version of it, because there was a note that Christopher Tolkien found from his father that he interpreted as a rejection of this myth, that there was no second prophecy of Mandos, and whatever prophecy was made was not known to the Valar. The knowledge is merely that Arda will end, but the details are not really known. The Peoples of Middle-earth mentions an alternate prophecy in which Túrin would return to slay Ancalagon, but he didn't. He didn't return during the War of Wrath. No mention of the dragon was made in the final battle. It was Eärendil that killed the dragon. So, with all of that being said, let's just say for the sake of fun that we do accept the prophecy as not only existing, but being true. The crux of the question is, if we accept that Túrin could kill Morgoth in the final battle, why can't he kill him while he was alive? The answer is really simple. There's sort of two answers here. The first answer is that Túrin didn't get anywhere near Morgoth when he was alive. And if he killed Morgoth at this point, the entire rest of the story doesn't happen. There's no guarantee that Morgoth would even fight Túrin if he was challenged. He didn't fight Feanor. He stayed inside, and he sent the Balrogs out instead. And there's no guarantee that the Black Sword would be able to kill Morgoth at this point in time. Which brings me to the second reason. Túrin in this prophecy is returning from the Doom of Man. It's a miracle made possible only by the direct device of God. Not only is Túrin returning, but so is Gurthang the Black Sword, because when Túrin died, the sword broke in half. So, Túrin seems to be the chosen mortal hero of Iluvatar. Eonwe is the chosen Maya. Tulkas is the chosen Vala. Eärendil is the chosen elf. So it's not hard to believe that these heroes would be specifically empowered for this specific conflict. So, yeah, we don't know that he would have gotten anywhere near Morgoth, or that he would have been able to defeat Morgoth at that point. Okay, here's the thumbnail one. I know you guys want to hear about this. This person, who was it? Was this anonymous, or is there a name on this one? This one's anonymous. This person just asks, what is your review of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Season 1 as a whole? So, obviously there's a lot of controversy. Some people liked it, some people didn't like it. Everybody's opinions were really, really loud. My opinion is not very loud. I'm just going to tell you what I thought. I thought it was good. It could have been great, but it wasn't great. It was hobbled by a few things. So I'm going to sort of give you the things that I love about The Rings of Power, some things that I'm kind of neutral on, and some things that I didn't like. So here's what I liked. Everything to do with the dwarves was great. Moria, Durin was like my favorite character in the show. His wife was great too. I really enjoyed them. The casting, some of the casting, at least Elrond in particular, I really, I don't know the guy's name, but I really liked his take on Elrond. Elendil was great. Sauron, that Sauron guy. And that dude, let's not kid ourselves, that's totally Gandalf. They were all really great choices for those specific roles. Galadriel, the casting was good, but I feel the character was a little mishandled but there's room to improve on that going forward. The sets were good, the locations were good, the fan fiction of it was very fun. I was amused by the speculative origin of Mithril, and I was amused with the way they danced around the Silmarillion, because it was not supposed to ever be an adaptation of the Silmarillion. They don't have the legal rights to adapt the Silmarillion. They have to pull only from the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings appendices. So the fact that they were able to tell a story similar to the Second Age story, Akalabeth, in the Silmarillion, was interesting the way they pulled it off. Some of the original characters I liked. Adar was fantastic, the orc Adar. Arondir, he was cool. And of course I mentioned Durin's wife, I liked her. And of course the music, if you can't get Howard Shore, get Bear McCreary, he did a fantastic job with the music. Here are the things I'm a little neutral on. The rest of the casting. Some of the elves seemed a bit off. Gil-galad, Celebrimbor, the actors did a fine job, but they didn't look like elves to me. I felt Celebrimbor looked very old. I'm not sure what to make of Isildur, not an elf, but let's talk. I'm not really sure. I don't really have a strong opinion of the kid who played Isildur one way or another. The original characters, I like them, but I can't comment on how good the casting was because they're original characters, but I will say that I prefer the dwarves. Glossing over Morgoth, I'm a little on that, I get it. There's enough material to show more of him than that, 5 seconds of Morgoth that we got. Ungoliant was mentioned in The Lord of the Rings, so they could have included her in some way in that intro. And I understand that it's a Second Age story, but I think they rushed past the First Age backstory, and they could have expanded on it just using what's in The Lord of the Rings. They totally could have. The dialogue and writing, a lot of people just say it's bad, and when you ask for why it's bad, they just repeat lines from the show, which is not an argument. Just saying lines from the show in a mocking tone is not anything. The dialogue is fine. It's certainly not Tolkien, though. It's not total crap either. It could have been better. I hope that they improve that. The mystery of Sauron was just too easy. I had the dude pegged in 5 minutes. I knew who Sauron was, so they could have made that a little bit more difficult to figure out. And finally, here are the things about the Rings of Power that I did not like. The costumes. My God, the costume design is terrible. Now, somebody on Quora in a comment mentioned that it may not necessarily have been the costumes that were bad. It might have been the cinematography. The lighting doesn't make it look good. But no, I think the costumes were just kind of... They were going a little too video gamey with the costumes, I felt. Some of the original characters, I mentioned I liked most of them, but I'm not impressed by Isildur's sister. I get that they're not including Anarion at this point. They may never include Anarion. But the sister, she's just barely a character as far as I'm concerned. The supposed origin of Mordor, I get it. But it's not like Mordor's origin was locked into the Silmarillion. They could have come up with something. They could have just said Morgoth created it. They wanted to show it as being sort of a regular place that became that in the Second Age. I don't really agree with that. The compression of the story and the ages of the characters and the way it just doesn't line up. Things that are supposed to happen over many years are happening very quickly. I get why. I just wish that it wasn't that way. Pharazôn wasn't born yet, Isildur wasn't born yet, blah, 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 blah. And finally, did I mention the costumes were bad? I'm just going to throw that in there one last time. There's room for improvement. I didn't hate it. I enjoyed it. When I went into watching it, I was like, I'm going to watch this very expensive fan fiction, and I'm going to enjoy myself, hopefully. And I did. I think they did a little better than I expected, to be honest. I do hope that Season 2 is an improvement, but... I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing Círdan. I'm already annoyed that they recast Adar and they worked through the writer's strike without having any writers on set. It makes me nervous. You should always have the writers on set. And just to head off any comments, if you hate the show, if you absolutely detest it, cool. You do you. Your opinion's valid. But instead of leaving me a comment about it, maybe make a video about what you don't like. That's just saying. I don't really like to deal with that, the negativity aspect of it. I did go into what I didn't like about it, and I went into what I did like about it. So anyway, let's move on to the next question. Okay, this one came in from Gus Williams, and Gus here asks, in The Lord of the Rings, who sent Faramir slash Boromir their dream? Why did they intercede in this way? Are there other contemporaneous examples of their intercession? So, yeah, the answer here is the Valar. The Valar are totally behind this. Though you may question which Valar did it. So we know the dream came from the Valar rather than Ilúvatar due to the words that Boromir used in Rivendell when he described it. I'm just going to read this just very brief bit of the Fellowship of the Ring. In that dream I thought the eastern sky grew dark, and there was a growing thunder, but in the west a pale light lingered, and out of it I heard a voice, remote but clear, crying, and then it goes on with the poem. Boromir mentions that the voice that spoke in his dream came out of a pale light in the west, capital W. And this is not like wherever's west of where he was, west, the west, capital W, that's Aemon, that's the Undying Lands. Now, which Valar were responsible? Why did they do this? Well, they did it because he needed to be there. They needed to be there. It was important. Obviously, Faramir was sort of the original choice, but then they sent it to Boromir as well, probably knowing Boromir's personality and that he would insist on going, and it may have been started with Faramir, but Faramir may have had that dream 20 times and never really thought much about it, but then when his brother has the same dream, having a recurring dream might just be something psychological that your brain is working through, a problem that you don't, that because therapists don't exist in Gondor, you don't know how to, well, maybe they do, I don't know. I've never heard of a therapist in Gondor, but when two people have the same dream, that's when it's magic. That's when there's divine intervention involved. So which Valar? There are a few candidates. Manwë is, of course, he's the one in charge. He's the most powerful. Varda is the wisest. Irmo, also known as Lorien, was specifically invested in visions and dreams. Ulmo is worthy of mention because he's the only one of the powers that seems particularly concerned with the fates of men specifically. And as he chose Tuor to be his messenger, so too may he have chosen Faramir and Boromir as his seekers. Or it could have been a joint effort. It could have been all of them. Okay, next question. This one came in anonymously. What is the backstory of Gandalf? Why was he sent to Middle-earth? Where did he come from? And why was he chosen? What is his purpose there? I can go into a lot here. I'm going to try to make this brief. Gandalf's real name is Olorin, and he is an Ainu, which means Holy One, meaning that he is essentially an angel. Olorin was created by Ilúvatar, that's God, in the Timeless Halls, which is, I guess you would say that's heaven, in a sense, before the universe was created, and as all the Ainur did, he participated in Ainulindale, which means music of the Holy Ones. That's the song that shaped the creation of the universe. Olorin descended into Arda along with many others, and as he was not in the top 15 of them, he wasn't considered Valar. He was considered Maya, which basically means beautiful. Olorin first came to Middle-earth during the War of the Valar, along with 4 other guardians under the leadership of Melian, who protected the elves as the Valar battled Melkor. Olorin was said to walk among the elves in disguise as one of them, or invisibly, and he gave them fair dreams and visions, and wisdom as well. The second time that he came to Middle-earth, he was incarnated as an older man, and when he was, in this case, he was sent there on a mission by Manwë to assist the free peoples of Middle-earth against Sauron through leadership and inspiration. The project was known as the Istari, which means wizards. It started with Alatar and Kuramo volunteered for this. Alatar became Morenatar the Blue, and Kuramo became Saruman the White. Although Manwë insisted that Olorin go, and of course he became Gandalf the Grey, despite the fact that Olorin actually didn't want to go. These 2 other guys were volunteering, but Olorin wasn't actually interested. He was fearful. He had misgivings. Olorin was considered to be the wisest of all the Maiar, and he was recognized as very important by Varda. Unlike many Maya who study under or serve a single Vala, Olorin was this guy who wanted to learn from everybody. He studied under multiple Valar, including Varda himself. Alatar was the first wizard to travel to Middle-earth along with his friend Palando, who became Ramastano the Blue, who came in the Second Age around the same time as, and possibly with, Glorfindel. Curumo, Olorin, and Iwendel, who became Radagast the Brown, came in the Third Age. During his travels, he was given many names, but of course the one that he liked the most was Gandalf, which means Elf of the Cane, which was given to him by men who lived in the north. As the Grey, his job was to foster positive relations between the races and help them work together to defeat Sauron. Later on, after his death and his resurrection, he returned as the White, which was specifically to replace Saruman, because Saruman had basically abandoned his post at this point. In this, his purpose was more a leader and a guide, though he continued to also do both jobs as far as I'm concerned. Okay, next question. Let's see, this one's anonymous. In The Lord of the Rings, what would happen if Gríma Wormtongue was imprisoned and locked in the dungeons of Rohan and never sent free to join Saruman and forced to face trial and punishment after Sauron was defeated by living and working as a slave? Only bad things would have come from this. Anytime you pick apart the story and you say, well, what if it happened differently? It falls apart completely. And I could tell you, I don't think Sauron would have been defeated if Gríma was not let free. It was Gríma that killed Saruman in the end, so if he had not been there to do that, Saruman could have left the Shire unmolested and caused issues in the rest of the world. But that's small picture. Let's talk big picture. If Gríma's arrested and he's jammed into the dungeons instead of allowed to leave in peace, he doesn't go back to Saruman, obviously. This means that he doesn't throw the Palantir from the window at Orthanc. Pippin never uses the Palantir. Sauron isn't led to believe that the ring bearer was captured by Saruman. Aragorn doesn't get to use the Palantir and trick Sauron into believing that he now has the One Ring and show him the tokens of his office. Sauron builds his power slowly in Mordor instead of attacking rapidly until he has a force that could wipe out Gondor in one fell swoop, and Frodo and Sam probably fail because there are too many of Sauron's minions in Mordor. So, yeah, anytime you change something, it usually all falls apart. Okay, here's a question from... Oh, this one's anonymous. Why did Tolkien name it Mount Doom? It doesn't seem consistent with the rest of his naming scheme. Was it his editor who named it? How did this happen? So, Mount Doom is just a translation of the actual name of it into English. All of Tolkien's names have meanings, though sometimes they're a little hard to decipher. In the case of Mount Doom, in Gondor, they called it Aemon Amarth, which means Mount Doom. The elves called it Orodruin, which means Burning Mountain. All of the names that Tolkien gives have very direct translations in one language or another, such as Minas Tirith means Guard Tower. Caradhras means Red Horn. So, you know, it's just basically saying the name in English instead of in... Gondor Sindarin or Westron or whatever, you know. Okay, next question. This one's a quick one. Why did Bilbo keep the One Ring for so long after seeing what happened to Gollum? Bilbo had no reason to believe that the ring had anything to do with Gollum being that way. He didn't know that Gollum was a hobbit that had been sort of twisted and corrupted into being this. For all he knew, Gollum was just some weird creature that lived in a lake under a mountain, and he was just like that. For all he knew, there could have been dozens of those guys down there. So, yeah, there was no reason for him to make that connection that the ring had caused that. And the ring had become pretty precious to Bilbo as it had become precious to Gollum. Not to the same extent, of course. So he wasn't going to give it up so easily anyway. Okay, next question. Why isn't the union of Imrazor the Numenarian and Mithril, the Sylvan companion of Nimrodel, we just talked about Nimrodel, counted as the fourth or chronologically third pairing of elves and men? So the timing of getting this question was interesting because I mentioned I was writing a story, and I am writing a story about Imrazor the Numenarian and Mithril, and their meeting and their romance and everything, because it's not a story that's told, and I think it would be really cool. It's just a short story, nothing major. I'll probably talk about it when I finish it and put a link to where I've published it. You'll be able to go and read it. But anyway, we don't know if the story of Imrazor and Mithril is something that happened or it's a local Gondorian legend. I mean, it's certainly, we know that Amroth and Nimrodel, that part absolutely happened because Legolas talked about it, and it was an elvish legend, and elvish legends tend to be true. But even if it was true, the legend wasn't known in Greater Middle-earth, but none of that matters. What matters is that We have no idea how many unions of men and elves there actually were. We hear about there being 3, Beren and Luthien, Tuar and Idril, Aragorn and Arwen. But Tolkien didn't say 3 unions of elves and men. He said 3 unions of Edain and Eldar. I'm knocking over water bottles. I gotta throw these away. I drink a lot of water when I'm working. So, Edain is a very specific thing. You could even make an argument that Aragorn is not Edain. He's Dunedain, which is similar. They're descended from the Edain, who are the lords of Adunia and such, but you could say that kind of counts. Eldar. Now, that's an interesting one. That's the name that Orome gave to the elves. They initially called themselves Quendi. He called them Eldar, and you could say that because that's what Orome called the elves, that all elves are Eldar. But it came to mean the elves that left on the Great Journey. They were considered Eldar. Now, Arwen certainly did not partake in such a journey. Her ancestors did. But Mithril is a Sylvan elf. We have to remember that the Silmarillion is an in-universe chronicle. It's a rough-spun translation of accounts of the history of the elves written by people that witnessed what was going on, and then it was translated by Bilbo. The only Third Age section, because Mithril and Imrazor, that was in the Third Age, it deals pretty exclusively with the War of the Ring, and it was written by Elrond, who he may not have known that story of Imrazor and Mithril. So basically, it's 3 known unions of Eldar and Edain. You may say that there were unions of lower men and elves, or Edain with Sylvan elves, or Avari even, who refused to leave. You don't know how many of those unions are out there, but it's the 3 known ones. We kind of know about this when it was mentioned in Unfinished Tales, but at the same time, I would say that the real answer here is that Mithril is not Eldar. Okay, next question. This one came in from Whiterun Guard. I've heard that arrow to the knee line too many times. Does magic in The Lord of the Rings suffer from some form of entropy? Why were men always stronger and buildings always taller in former times? I get what you're getting at here. There's a theme of diminishment. I think entropy might not be the right word, because entropy means things go from being very ordered to less ordered, to more disorderly over time. It's not that things get weaker, it's that things get cluttered and chaotic. But you're onto something here. The Lord of the Rings seems like a really grandiose tale until you look back at the Second Age and the Last Alliance, which itself is paltry compared to the wars in Beleriand in the First Age, which was paltry compared to the War of the Valar. So what's the deal? In creating a myth that could be seen as a mythological past of the Earth, Tolkien was starting off with the idea that there was a lot of magic in the past, but it's now gone. We don't have magic. So in doing this, there are really only 2 ways that you could go about it. That everything faded away gradually, or that it all happened at once in some sort of grand cataclysm. Tolkien chose the gradual way of going about it. The Valar once lived in Middle-earth, and the elves awoke there, and they were supposed to be in Middle-earth. But it was Melkor's actions that caused the Valar to divest themselves from Middle-earth. He was one of them, and in fighting him, they did a lot of damage. So they bowed out. They left Middle-earth. They tried to take the elves with them, not in a conscious decision to abandon the men to Melkor. They didn't know where the men were. They hadn't awoken yet, so they didn't know the location of the sleeping aftercomers, the second-born children of Iluvatar. But this is an example of a large portion of the magic leaving Middle-earth. Melkor poured himself into the world. Arda is Morgoth's ring, so to speak. And this meant that Middle-earth specifically was tainted. Elves would either leave, or they would fall prey to what was called fading, and they would eventually become like spirits. The lives of men diminished over time. Constant wars broke the land, reshaped it, diminished it. Eventually the elves would be all gone. Even the dwarves who regained their glory would be gone. The hobbits would disappear from history. Everything would just become ordinary, from our perspective, as readers at least. Okay. Next question. What if the elves won the Battle of Unnumbered Tears? Oh dear. No. Like I said, usually when you change something like that, it ruins the whole story. Everything falls apart. But not only would that make everything fall apart, but it would have betrayed the entire point of the Silmarillion. The elves had to lose. Otherwise, they're just heroes battling evil. And that's not the story that Tolkien was telling. The Nerneath Arneodiad, it's important because the name, it means the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Let's look at the Doom of Mandos. I'm going to read the Doom of Mandos to you. Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the houses of Feanor the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east. And upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn, that they begin well. And by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason, shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. Ye have spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of Aemon. For blood ye shall render blood, and beyond Aemon ye shall dwell in death's shadow. For though Eru appointed you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon, and by torment, and by grief, and your houseless spirit shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide, and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom ye have slain should entreat for you. And those that endure in Middle-earth, and come not to Mandos, shall grow weary of the world, as with a great burden, and shall wane, and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken. By the way, I have the text of that in my phone, and I respond to text scammers with that, just for my own amusement. So these are the words that were spoken to the exiles after the first kinslaying. And some of them listened, some of them heeded this warning, and they turned back and they repented and they found forgiveness. Others did not, and they continued to Middle-earth, where they would perpetrate more kinslayings. If this did not come to pass, if the Battle of Unnumbered Tears did not happen, and notice, Unnumbered Tears, that was the first line there, it would vindicate them. And by extension, their actions, it would give rise to the ends justify the means. So what if they killed some Falmari? They were immortal, they would return from Mandos and do water, and then look what they did. They went to Middle-earth to defeat Morgoth, and they won. You can't argue with results, right? Tolkien is very insistent in all of his stories, from The Hobbit to the Silmarillion, that you can't do evil deeds and get good results. If you do evil in trying to do good, you've still done evil. The elves had to lose. They had to shed unnumbered tears and suffer the consequences. Otherwise, there's not much of a point to the story other than just a good versus evil battling. Now, the forces of good did eventually win. They did eventually defeat Morgoth, but that was not the story of the Feanorians. That was the host of the Valar and the prayers of the Arundel and Elwing, who came to the west and begged the Valar to intervene. Feanor didn't ask the Valar to intervene. He didn't ask them to do something about Morgoth. He just assumed they weren't ever going to get to it, and that he had to take it upon himself. And part of that was Morgoth's words to him. Even though he rejected Morgoth, nobody hated Morgoth more than Feanor. But he still played right into Morgoth's hands because he believed some of the things that Morgoth had told him. So there you have it. Okay, 2 more questions. Got through this pretty quickly. Let's see. Is it true that when Middle-earth elves die, their spirits return to the undying lands to the west and are given new bodies that resemble their old ones? And if so, why do they bother sailing to the west when they can travel by death and rebirth? So yeah, dying, it seems like it's just a shortcut to the west, but it's not quite an attractive prospect, I think. To them, it's not like a video game or a story to them. They're just like, oh, well, I've got to go to Valinor. You know, that would be rather unpleasant, you know. Dying does bring the spirit of the elf in question to the Undying Lands. They don't just materialize in Valinor or in Eldamar, but in Mandos. And they don't immediately get a new body, not until Namo has had his say. Namo is the judge and keeper of the halls of Mandos, and he's so associated with the realm of Mandos that the elves call him Mandos. They don't get new bodies until he says so. And their spirits cannot leave Mandos without his permission. They're stuck there until he says they could leave. As a matter of fact, not even Manwe, the king of the world, could leave Mandos without Namo's permission. That being said, the new body could only be created once the old one's gone completely. And that takes a little bit. It happens fast in Middle-earth, but fast for them is still a matter of years. Aside from that, Namo will indeed hold their spirits until they have repented for all their sins and all their crimes. And some of the elves, like Feanor, will never be released. So, yeah, a boat ride is a bit more pleasant than dying, even if death is not so permanent for you. It's still faster to travel by boat because you might be stuck in Mandos for a while. Okay, next question. Actually, this is the last question, and this came in from Dutch Patterson. Dutch is a really cool guy. He is possibly the youngest Tolkien scholar I know. He's still in high school, but we've talked multiple times in a mutual group that we're in, where we just sort of like compare a lot of notes and such. There's 9 of us, and we're writing articles, and and Dutch is sort of like the kid of the group, but he's such a good writer. But anyway, he's a really good guy, and he sent me this question. What are some events in Tolkien's mythology which you think would be particularly cinematic on the big screen? So I'm going to give you 3 examples. I give Dutch 3 examples. I'm going to give you guys 3 examples, all of which have never been filmed, never been adapted in any sense, keeping in mind that cinematic can mean various things. So I'm going to give you 1 romantic, 1 epic, and 1 tragic. So we'll start with the romantic. The first would be the meeting of Eleuthingel and Melian in the forest. Just imagine this. They meet for the first time. Their eyes lock. Their hands touch. And they're mesmerized by each other. They're unable to move or speak for hundreds of years. Imagine the time lapse in this film. The forest grows around them. The seasons change. The stars wheel overhead in the sky, all before either party can even utter a single word. And then can you imagine? We don't know what their first words to each other were. Can you imagine Thingol just after hundreds of years of touching hands and just being completely awestruck, and then he's just like, "Hi." It would be a great moment, I think. So let's give you the epic one. This is the second one. The arrival of Eärendil during the War of Wrath. Now imagine you're in the movie theater watching a film adaptation of the War of Wrath. The largest war scene ever filmed is playing out in front of you. It's in IMAX, maybe even in 3D. You're completely out of your mind on overpriced candy and the 600-ounce tub of soda that came with the combo meal. The host of the Valar is being pushed back by the forces of Ancalagon the Black and the winged dragons. The eagles are fighting. They're not doing too well. You see Thorondor take a blast of fire and spiral downwards. One of the Balrogs has Eonwe pinned down and is just hewing at him furiously. It cuts away Morgoth smiling. He manipulates his ring. He's using some sort of device like on a pedestal to rend the earth and issue forth flames onto the battlefield. It looks like it's over for the forces of good, and then a sudden bright star appears in the distance. The camera zooms in and you see Eärendil grasping the Silmaril, bellowing the names of the Valar. The ship crashes into the dragon. There's a gigantic explosion, and Calagon falls. The audience goes insane. They completely forget that The Hobbit was made into a trilogy. Last one, tragedy. The end of the children of Húrin. You know what I'm talking about. I don't mean Túrin slaying the dragon. The desperation and panic of Niniel as she cannot revive her husband. The voice of Morgoth issuing from the dying dragon, lifting the curse and revealing the truth of her real name, and that Túrin is her brother. The absolute silence as she casts herself over the ravine. The scream of Brandir as he witnesses this. Túrin slays Brandir in rage and madness. And then the elves show up and tell him the truth. The sword speaks. He casts himself on it. Cut to Húrin on Thangorodrim. He's old now. Tears are streaming down his face. He sees the image playing out in front of him. Cut to Morgoth. He's smiling wickedly. He knows he won. The final shot, the gravestone, the children of Húrin. I want to see that movie. I've said multiple times that my favorite book by Tolkien is The Children of Húrin. If any story of the First Age is made into a film, it has to be this one. It has to be. What a great story. Can you imagine how people are going to be at the end? Oh my god. Well, actually, can you imagine just seeing the romance play out between Túrin and Niniel, and the audience knows they're siblings. They don't know they're siblings, but the audience knows, and everybody's just like, oh, the cringe, right? Well, anyway, guys, it's been a lot of fun. If you like the video, you got all the way in 55 minutes in, right? 56 minutes in just a few seconds. So you gotta get it. You're morally obligated to leave me a like. You're morally obligated to leave me a good comment and just at least say hi. Just say hi. Just tell me you got to the end of the video or something. I'll see you guys next week. Send me some questions on Quora. The link is in the description. It's very easy to make a Quora account, or you can ask me a question in the comments. I'll answer it there if I can. I'll see you guys next time.